Fidelity offers dozens of index funds, and in this video we're going to be debunking which ones are the best to invest in. Hands down, index funds are the best approach out there when it comes to investing in the stock market. You don't need to pick stocks to become a millionaire by investing in the stock market. Instead, investing in low-fee index funds is the best approach for most people. Warren Buffett even said so himself. And with investments ranging from crypto ETFs to the Fidelity Zero Index mutual funds, Fidelity truly has something for everyone. And later on, I'm going to be showing you exactly how to invest in these Fidelity index funds and the Fidelity ETFs step by step, so be sure to stick around for the whole video. But for now, let's run through the 7 best Fidelity index funds out there. And real quick, guys, I am not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice, and you should always do your own research before investing. First up on the list, we have the Fidelity 500 Index Fund. This fund competes directly with popular investments like VOO or the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF. Now, since this is an index mutual fund and not an ETF, you can only purchase shares of this through the Fidelity investment platform, and you'll be able to tell pretty easily which ones of these are going to be index mutual funds because the stock symbol is going to have 5 characters. So in this case, it is FXAIX. But later on, I'm going to show you how to buy shares of this using the Fidelity app. If we scroll down and take a look at this chart here, this is going to show us how this Fidelity 500 fund aims to replicate the performance of the S&P 500 as closely as possible. And right now, it looks like there's only one line here, this blue line, which is the S&P 500 index. But if we toggle that off, this purple line here represents the performance of FXAIX or the Fidelity 500 fund. So it's pretty close there because it completely overlaps with the S&P 500. Now, for those who aren't familiar, the Standard & Poor's 500 index is an index that tracks the performance of the 500 largest publicly traded US companies. I have a full video about S&P 500 investing and what the S&P 500 is, so I'll put that in the corner for later if you want to learn more. The S&P 500 is going to be a market value weighted index, and that simply means that the larger a company is, the more weight that it's going to carry in the portfolio. And I'll show you exactly what that looks like here if we take a look at the top holdings. So when you invest in the Fidelity 500 index fund or any fund that tracks the S&P 500, a large portion of your money, 34% actually, goes right into these top 10 holdings. And as crazy as it sounds, 7% roughly, or 7 cents out of every dollar, goes right into Apple stock. And then about 6.5% goes into Microsoft, about 6% goes into Nvidia, and then you also have Amazon, Meta, Alphabet, Berkshire Hathaway, the other share class of Alphabet, Eli Lilly, and Broadcom making up a large portion of that portfolio. So a lot of your money goes right into tech. Now, in terms of the sectors that your money goes into or the segments of the economy, if we click over here to composition, this is going to show us what percentage of your money goes right into this segment of the US economy. So for example, 30.99% or just about 31% goes into information technology, and then it's financials, that's the second biggest category, followed by healthcare, consumer discretionary, and so forth. And based on the changes in the US economy and what companies are the most valuable, that's going to influence what percentage of your money flows into these particular sectors. So because big tech has become so dominant in today's economy, that is where most of your money goes when you invest in the S&P 500. The final key detail I want to cover here is the expenses associated with this fund. If we click here on fees and distributions, we can see here that it has a net expense ratio of 0.015%, and that is extremely cheap. Even fund providers like Vanguard, which are known for having some of the lowest fees in the industry, have an expense ratio on their VOO ETF of 0.03%. So that's actually going to be half the cost here if you invest through this Fidelity Index mutual fund, and that is why a lot of people will actually choose this over something like VOO, for example. The only stipulation being is that you have to do this investment through a Fidelity account only, and you can buy shares of VOO through any brokerage account. Up next on the list here, we have the Fidelity Large Cap Growth Index Fund. This is another index mutual fund that has to be purchased exclusively through the Fidelity investment platform. In terms of the benchmark here for this index fund, this aims to replicate the performance of the Russell 1000 Growth Index as close as possible. So if we toggle off this large cap growth chart and we simply look at FSPGX versus the Russell 1000, if we toggle that off, you can see that it mirrors that almost identically. So this is tracking the Russell 1000 Growth Index very closely. closely. The Russell 1000 Growth Index represents the top 1,000 stocks in the US stock market. However, this large cap index fund only tracks the top 400 of those 1,000 companies. If we click over here to portfolio composition, just like before, we can see what are the top holdings. And as you can see, this has much more weight here in information technology. Before we were looking at about 30%. This has 48% or almost 50% of your money in information technology. This is going to be a more aggressive investment, which means that it could have higher potential returns in a strong economy. But if there is a bear market that takes place, for example, this is going to get hit harder than something like the Fidelity 500 fund because there is more risk in the portfolio. The other thing you want to know about this here is if we scroll down, this is going to show you the top 10 holdings, and you can see how a lot more of your money is in big tech. 12% of this, even about almost 12.5%, goes right into Apple, 11.5% into Microsoft, about 10% into Nvidia, and so forth into those same companies. It's just more weight going into the big tech growth names. If we take a look here at the fees and distributions, the fees are a little bit higher here, coming in at a net expense ratio of 0.035%, but this is still very, very inexpensive compared to the industry averages. Now guys, if you've gotten value out of this video so far, if you wouldn't mind just dropping a like on this video, as well as hitting the subscribe button and turning on all notifications with the bell, that would really help me out with the YouTube algorithm. Up next here, we have our first bond index mutual fund. That is the Fidelity US Bond Index Fund, trading under FXNAX. So once again, this will be exclusive to Fidelity. As you get older, especially, you want to consider putting some of your portfolio into bonds instead of having 100% in stocks or equities, as this is going to limit your downside potential if we see a market correction or a market crash, for example. Bonds are going to have less return potential than stocks, but the important thing is here that they are also significantly less risky. So you do want to consider this as you get older and closer towards your retirement age, when you want to be actually using that money, and taking a massive hit during a stock market crash could be detrimental to you being able to retire, for example. A general rule of thumb a lot of people follow here is the 120 rule. That's where you take 120 and subtract your current age, and that's the percentage that you might want to have allocated into stocks or equities, with the rest going into bonds. So if you're 35 years old, for example, that would give you 85, which would be 85% of your money in stocks and 15% in bonds, and every 5 years it's recommended to change that allocation. So at age 40, for example, you might want to switch to an 80-20 portfolio. Now, if you're interested in a Fidelity ETF that is comparable here, there is also the Fidelity Total Bond ETF that would be available for purchase through any brokerage account. So keep that in the back of your mind if you are not using Fidelity, for example, as your investment provider for purchasing these shares. But what we're going to do now is click here on the composition tab and take a look at the portfolio diversification. This shows us here that 42% of this is in US Treasuries, which are going to be the safest bonds. And then you have about 26% in corporate bonds, and then 25% in MBS or mortgage-backed securities. So that is the core composition here of this portfolio. You can also see, based on the regional diversification, about 93.7% is US, with about 6.3% being foreign bond exposure. And looking at the credit quality, about 70% is US government, which is the top tier. And then everything else is going to be in the investment grade bond categories here of being BBB or better. The last thing I want to take a look at here is the fees. So if we click here on fees and distributions, we can see this has a net expense ratio of 0.025%, which is very reasonable. Up next on our list, we have the first Fidelity Zero Index Mutual Fund. This is the Fidelity Zero Total Market Index Fund, FZROX, once again exclusive to the Fidelity investment platform. As far as these Fidelity Zero Index Mutual Funds go, these are a select group of index mutual funds that have zero minimums to invest, as well as zero expenses for fund management, making these extremely popular. As far as the underlying investment here, the Fidelity Zero Total Market Index Fund aims to provide broad exposure to a large portion of the entire US stock market. This includes a blend of both large, mid, and small cap companies, with a total of 2,624 individual stock holdings within this fund. This is going to be more aggressive than something like the Fidelity 500 Index Fund, because you're getting more exposure to small and mid-sized companies by investing in those thousands of companies versus versus just the top 500 through the S&P 500. If we click over here on composition, we can get a look here at the major market sectors. This is going to have a similar spread here to the Fidelity 500 fund, with about 30% of your money being in the information technology sector, and then financials thereafter, followed by healthcare. If we scroll down here and look at the top holdings, you can see once again it's similar to the composition of the Fidelity 500 fund, but there's a little bit less concentration here in the top 10, and that's because it's picking up those much smaller companies because it has a lot more holdings, giving you more exposure to the entire US stock market. If we scroll up here and then click on the fees and distributions, this will show us here the net expense ratio of 0.00%. So once again, no fees paid to Fidelity for managing this investment. Next up on our list, we have our first international equity fund. This is also another one of the Fidelity Zero Index funds, the Fidelity Zero International Index Fund, FZILX, once again exclusive to the Fidelity platform. This Fidelity Zero Index Fund aims to provide you with broad exposure to the international stock market, excluding the US stock market. While it's not completely necessary, some people prefer to diversify their portfolios outside of just the US equities market by using an international fund like this. However, it's important to remember here that the US stock market has been the best performing market over the long run, so you wouldn't want to put a large portion of your money into something like this. Instead, you would use this as a garnish, if you will, for a well-rounded investment portfolio. If we click over here on the composition tab, it's going to show us the top sectors. So you have a lot of your money here in financials, followed by industrials, and then information technology, consumer discretionary, and so forth. If you look here at asset allocation, 99.76% is international equities. If we scroll down here to country diversification, the largest component here is going to be Japan, followed by the UK, Canada, France, etc. Just to prove to you here that the net expense ratio once again is at 0.00% as part of the Fidelity Zero Index Mutual Funds. Next up here we have our first ETF on the list offered through Fidelity. So this is something you can buy through any brokerage platform, and I'm going to be showing you how to buy this later. This is the Fidelity Wise Origin Bitcoin Fund, which has 100% allocation into Bitcoin. So if you were looking to get exposure to Bitcoin without going through an exchange or having self-custody, for example, this is a very popular method for doing so. Now the net expense ratio here is 0.25%. That is a little bit higher than what we've been looking at earlier. However, this is their new and trendy investment product, so they are cashing in here to some extent. The last ETF on the list that we're going to look at here is the most popular Fidelity ETF in terms of assets under management, and that is the Fidelity MSCI Information Technology Index ETF. This has a total of 11.78 billion in assets under management. In terms of the benchmark here, this fund aims to replicate as closely as possible the MSCI USA Information Technology Index, which tracks the performance of the large and mid-cap US equities that are within the information technology sector. Simply put, this is a diversified investment into the mid and large-sized US tech companies. You can see here that this has 17.5% of your money going right into Apple, for example, 15.5% into Microsoft, about 15% into Nvidia, and so forth. So you are heavily concentrated here in big tech growth. And if you look at the sector exposure, 99.63% is information technology, and this is going to be a expense ratio here of 0.08%. So not too high, but it is going to be a little bit higher than what we have looked at previously with the Fidelity Index Mutual Funds. Now I'm going to show you how to buy shares of the Fidelity crypto ETFs that we covered using the commission-free stock trading app Robinhood. And here's the best part. You can get a free stock worth up to $200 if you sign up using my affiliate link. All you have to do is visit ryanoscribner.com/Robinhood or click the top link down below and create a new account. And I do have a full tutorial on Robinhood investing for beginners, so I'll put a card in the corner for later. But for now, let's go ahead and invest in shares of the Fidelity Bitcoin ETF, and I'm also going to show you how to locate that Fidelity Ethereum ETF if you're interested in that as well. Now, I already have money in my Robinhood account that I use for demo purposes. I have $15 of buying power, but if you needed to deposit funds yourself, you can check out my full tutorial, and it walks you through exactly how to add money to your account. But what we're going to do now is click on the search icon in the top right, and we're going to type in FBTC, and that brings up the Fidelity Wise Origin Bitcoin Bitcoin fund. And if we click on that, we can see that this is actually up 5% today, likely because the price of Bitcoin is moving up as well. That's going to directly impact the price of this fund, and it's going to follow that as closely as possible since this has 100% allocation into Bitcoin. Now, before we invest, I also want to show you the Ethereum fund, and you would locate that by typing in FETH, and that's the Fidelity Ethereum fund, which is also up, and that makes sense because Bitcoin is the bellwether for the crypto market. But we're going to click the back button. We're going to go back to FBTC. We're going to click here on that, and if we scroll down, we can get some information here about this particular ETF, as well as other ETFs that people often own. So there are other providers out there for crypto ETFs. But what we're going to do now is click on the buy button in the bottom right, and we're going to invest using dollars, purchasing fractional shares of the ETF, and we're going to buy $10 worth, which is going to be 0.18135 shares. When you're all set, all you have to do is swipe up, and just like that, we invested in this Fidelity Bitcoin ETF using Robinhood. If we click on done and then click on cancel here, we can revisit the home screen by clicking on the back button a few times. And if we scroll down, we can see that I do have a crypto investment in this account as well. This is directly through Robinhood. But in addition to that, we have shares of the Fidelity Bitcoin ETF here. And if we click on that now and scroll down, we can get details about our position and track our investment here using the Robinhood app. But now let's say you want to invest in one of the Fidelity Index mutual funds that we covered, such as the Fidelity 500 fund. Those are going to be exclusive to Fidelity, so let me open up my demo account and I'll walk you through that process as well. I also have a full Fidelity tutorial for beginners, so I'll put a card in the corner for later, as well as a link down in the description below. Here we are inside of my demo Fidelity account, and what we're going to do from here is click on my individual account here in the middle, and this is going to bring up a list of our positions if we scroll down. Now, from my previous tutorial video, we already own some fractional shares of FXAIX, the Fidelity 500 Index Fund, but I want to show you how you would locate that in case you don't have it in your portfolio already. And I do have about $30 here of buying power, but if you are starting from scratch and you want to figure out how to link your bank and deposit money, you can check out my full tutorial for instructions on that. But what we're going to do is click on the search icon in the top right, and if you know the symbol, you can type it in. If not, you can just type in Fidelity, and this will bring up a list of the popular Fidelity investments. So we can see here FXAIX is the Fidelity 500 Index Fund, and that's what I'm going to be using here as the demo. So we're going to click here on that, and this is going to bring up the page here for that index mutual fund. You can scroll through here to get details about the fund, historical performance. You can also get information here about the previous dividend distributions, top 10 holdings, and you can also get details about your current position. So I already own some shares here. It's down a little bit just because the market does move up and down, but over the long run, you do see positive returns. If we go back here to the overview, we can see over the last year, this has returned almost 25%, and the 10-year average here has been a 12.8% return, which is very strong. But what we're going to do from here is click on the buy button, and then we are going to buy now, just a one-time purchase. You can do recurring investments as well if you want to, and we're going to be purchasing in fractional shares. So under the amount tab here, we're going to type in $10, and then if we click on the preview order button, this shows us here that we're going to be purchasing $10 of FXAIX, and then this is going to buy us an additional 0.051 shares at a net asset value of $195.66. Now, with these Fidelity Index mutual funds, the order isn't going to close immediately, and that's because all of the orders are going to be settled at the same time at the end of the trading day, and that won't be reflected in your account until the following business day. So tomorrow we'll actually see this new investment in my account, but if we click on buy FXAIX, at this point the order was received, and if we now click on track order, we're going to see the order in my account here, but it shows that the order is open. It's going to show it open for the rest of the trading day, probably even tonight, but tomorrow when we take a look in the account, it will be filled. And if we click on the X and navigate back home at this point, and then if we click on my individual account once once again, we should see my cash balance is down to about just under $20, so it took the $10 right out of my cash balance. But that's how you would invest in the index mutual funds, and if you wanted to use some of the other ones that we mentioned here, you would just look them up with the search icon and the symbol, or just type in the full name. And just like that, you are now well versed in the world of Fidelity index funds. If you made it to the very end, don't forget to drop a like on this video, as well as subscribe and hit the bell for future notifications. You can click below to watch my full Fidelity tutorial for beginners, and I hope to see you there.